The biting wind whipped around Sarah, a meager shield against the icy grip of reality. At 13, the world had already dealt her a hand she never anticipated. A tiny life stirring within her, and the crushing betrayal of her parents. Their words, sharp as shards of ice, echoed in her mind. "You made your bed, now lie in it." They'd left her, a trembling pregnant child, on the steps of the only place they thought would take her. A rundown, perpetually underfunded community shelter. Inside, the shelter was a symphony of hushed anxieties and the clatter of mismatched crockery. Sarah, her small frame barely visible beneath an oversized coat, felt utterly alone. Days bled into weeks, marked by the growing curve of her belly and the deepening chasm of despair in her heart. She avoided eye contact, flinched at sudden movements, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. She was a ghost, haunting her own life. Then, he appeared. Not a savior, not a hero, but a broken man named Arthur. He emerged from the swirling snow, a solitary figure with eyes that held the weary sadness of 1,000 forgotten sunsets. His clothes were patched and dusted with snow, his hands calloused from years of battling the elements. And his spirit, it seemed, was as fractured as hers. Arthur was a hermit, a quiet presence who spent his days tending to a hidden, snow-covered garden and repairing the small, dilapidated cabin he called home, his own past a tightly sealed book. He rarely spoke, but his silence was different from hers. It was a comfortable quiet, observant and kind. One blustery afternoon, a sudden dizzy spell sent Sarah reeling, her already weak legs collapsing beneath her. Before she fell into the icy embrace of the snow, Arthur was there, his arms strong and steady, catching her. It wasn't the impersonal touch of a stranger or the cold indifference of her parents. It was a hold that was hesitant at first, then firm, and surprisingly gentle. As he helped her towards the roughly built cot in the corner of the cabin, his hand lingered for a moment on her arm, a silent offering of support. Over the next few weeks, a strange, unspoken bond began to form. Arthur never pried, never offered unsolicited advice. Instead, he would simply appear with a bowl of warm, snow-melted water, or a piece of dried meat when she looked pale, or silently offer her his worn, patched blanket on particularly frigid nights. He'd sit on a rough-hewn stool nearby while she ate, his presence a comforting anchor in her turbulent world. One evening, the fear became too much. Sarah felt the first sharp pangs, a primal ache that tightened her belly and squeezed her breath. Panic seized her. She was too young, too scared, too alone in this vast, frozen wilderness. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks, silent sobs that shook her fragile body. Arthur, hearing her distressed whimpers through the thin walls of the cabin, was by her side in an instant. He didn't ask questions. He simply sat on the edge of the rough bed, and then, slowly, carefully, he gathered her into his arms. It was the first time in months, perhaps years, that she had felt truly held. Not like a burden, not like a mistake, but like something precious. His embrace was awkward, a little stiff, but it was filled with a warmth that seeped into her bones, a warmth that defied the biting cold outside. He held her like a father, a silent promise of protection in a world that had offered her none. He didn't say, "It'll be okay," or "Don't worry." He just held her, a broken man offering solace to a broken girl, their shared pain knitting them together in that moment. And as the contractions grew stronger, and the fear threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah clung to Arthur, a silent understanding passing between them. In his arms, she found not just comfort, but a flicker of hope, a fragile belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she wouldn't have to face this alone after all. The world outside might have cast her aside, but in the quiet strength of this broken man's embrace, Sarah began to believe that she, and the life within her, might just have a chance amidst the snow. If you like these stories, please make sure to like and subscribe for more. As the contractions intensified, Arthur remained a steadfast presence. He gathered more blankets, creating a nest of warmth on the rough cot. He didn't know much about birthing a child, but his hands, usually rough and calloused, were surprisingly gentle as he wiped Sarah's brow with a damp cloth. He spoke in low, soothing tones, not empty reassurances, but simple acknowledgments of her strength. He was a grounding force against the storm of pain and fear. Hours passed, marked only by Sarah's cries and Arthur's quiet encouragement. Finally, with a gasp and a final push, a small cry pierced the stillness of the cabin. A life had entered the world, fragile yet full of potential. Arthur, awestruck, helped Sarah cradle the tiny infant, a daughter, wrapped in a piece of his worn shirt. In that moment, as the first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape with a soft glow, a fragile family was born. The world outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but within the small cabin, nestled in the arms of a broken man, a young mother and her child had found a haven, a flicker of hope in the heart of winter. The journey ahead would be arduous, but they would face it together, bound by a love born of shared hardship and the quiet strength of a man who held them like a father. Arthur, his gaze fixed on the tiny face nestled in Sarah's arms, felt a shift deep within him. The emptiness he'd carried for so long, a void as vast as the snowy landscape outside, seemed to shrink, filled by the fragile warmth of new life. He moved then, quietly stoking the embers of the fire, making sure the cabin stayed as warm as possible against the biting cold. He found a clean cloth, carefully tearing it into strips to serve as makeshift swaddling. The next few days were a blur of hushed vigilance. Sarah, exhausted but resolute, learned the delicate art of motherhood under Arthur's watchful eye. He was surprisingly adept, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. A warm drink, a softer pillow, the subtle signs that the baby needed changing. He ventured out into the snow, returning with what little food he could forage, his silent determination a stark contrast to the despair that had once consumed him. They were no longer just two broken souls surviving in isolation. They were a unit, a small, fragile family forged in the crucible of the wilderness. Each breath of the newborn, each shared glance between Sarah and Arthur, wove their fates tighter together, promising that even in the heart of winter, warmth could be found,